Stimmt.
All right. It's that time of the week again. Welcome back to another freshly squeezed episode of PKs on Air. It almost feels like summer. You can see it on my face. It's a bit like shining inside.
Yeah.
We do have sun in Germany. I think that's the good news. Speaking of news, we have a lot of news actually, and a lot of things that happened in February that we're gonna kind of go through. Yeah, February. I need to kind of like, it's already March, right? It's already March. Time is flying. Anyhow,
Yeah.
I'm so this week is just us. So I'm, as always, obviously joined by my fantastic co-host Dominique. But that's about it. So no guest for this week, right? Feels a bit weird.
Definitely, yeah. It feels a bit weird, but
a bit empty.
A bit empty,
true.
but I think we have enough content to fill our hour for this week. I think that should be fine, at least once a month, to be just the two of us.
Yeah, I agree. Even though I have to say we had some really cool like episodes the last weeks with a ton of content. And by the way, also thanks for all the feedback that we got on that. So that's, as always, so just kind of quick housekeeping notes maybe up front before we get straight into all the stuff that happened and is going to happen. So down there, pa.ag/notes has the recaps, including the videos as well as the slide decks. So some of these stuff that we've been talking about in the last weeks included like a massive amount of changes done by Google as well as Bing on the paid search side. So last week we had our very own Julia joining us. So that's available now. We had the huge kind of episode with Paul on iOS and kind of the tracking changes and whatnot. So this is also live. We had Izzy Smith from Write as a guest 2 weeks ago on monitoring website quality, those kinds of things. So that's also up in the recaps. Yeah, if you want to follow along on the kind of previous episodes and things that happen here on the show, feel free to poke around. Yeah, for this week, as you already said, Dominique, we have a bunch of news. A lot of stuff to talk about. We're going to share the links afterwards. Again, feel free to pop into the comments because there's, some controversial topics that we probably need to address that happened in the last, let's say, 4 weeks. One specifically, I think, around, web performance again and this Core Web Vitals situation and some other things where, let's just say Google kind of, I wouldn't say reverted, but certainly softened up some of their statements. I think that's going to be an interesting discussion to have. But I guess before we go into it, let's have a quick, as always, look onto the events side of things. Is there anything that you are following or are excited about that's going to happen in the next 3-4 weeks? I mean, SMX, obviously, right? So that's SMX
exactly.
Virtual. Yeah, so the one that usually happens in Munich. I think that's the biggest show of the month for sure. Exactly. So that's happening in March.
And 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, 2 weeks time. So I have 2 workshops. Just saw, funny enough, like a couple of minutes ago, I just saw the registration list for the workshop. So quite excited about that. A lot of technical stuff on, I think it's Monday and Tuesday, if I'm not totally wrong. And then, of course, there's SMX, which is also happening on 2 days. So there's Wednesday and Thursday is SMX fully virtual. So I'm kind of curious. I think I mentioned we had some interesting experiences earlier this year with the Hopin platform for like the SEJ Summit. And if you recall, we had Hopin as a platform with a hybrid event as well. Like, so when Munich happened, that was also based on Hopin. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed especially for the guys, that this is not going to happen again, because that was very unpleasant, I think, also from an organizational perspective.
Yep.
And straight after SMX, is it straight after SMX or straight before? I don't recall. We have Alexandra joining us to talk a bit more about events, virtual events, and that type of stuff, right? So we're going to have like an event dedicated episode.
Exactly. I think that could be the 22nd. If I'm not completely
So
wrong.
straight after SMX.
Yeah,
we're gonna talk a bit more about virtual events in general, also stuff that we think is gonna work, think that we're gonna be probably seeing in the near future, next kind of 6 to 12 months time. So I think there's gonna be a lot of changes. Also, I saw there's a couple of discussions going on Twitter. So why you could not just adapt the same kind of offline event experience to online? You just need to change some things. A lot of people are trying very different things. So yeah. I think we also talked about, so SMX is going to be quite exciting. I think we also talked a bit about, there's another SMX actually coming up. I mean, it's not in March, but it's in April, mid of April, called SMX. Yeah, it's called SMX Create, and we also gonna be virtually present, I think. There. So this time we're gonna talk a bit about PPC actually. So SMX Create, not me by the way. Like, don't worry, this is not gonna happen. But our very own Charlotte is covering some of the PPC stuff on ad copy and those types of things. So yeah, SMX Create is happening mid of April. And what else event-wise? I think that's pretty much it from March, right? There's some smaller things, but not much more happening.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
All right.
Not that much going on during March.
Everyone is busy, so that's probably why, I would imagine. All right, so I think people are kind of still dialing in a bit, but that's fine. We're just gonna get going because there is a lot of ground to cover. If you wanna chat along, feel free to do that. Kind of, questions or whatever, pop them into the comments, YouTube, Facebook, etc. is all fine. So I'm gonna put up my other screen if that works. Yep, that works. And we're going to walk you through a couple of things that happen. Some are just going to be very quick, more like FYI things. Some, I think, are a bit longer this month. We can have a bit of a kind of discussion because some really, really interesting things. So one thing, and this is more like an FYI, to be honest, to start with. Just, I think, last week, 22nd, Google kind of, Search Console is quite a moving target, if you so will. Right now, there's a lot of changes, which is great. I mean, I think kind of also... it kind of confirms, I would say, that we're really kind of using this as like the single point of communication with like webmasters and site owners, and kind of also like from a data perspective. So that's great. There was also like a survey, I think we mentioned that in the other month, where you could like vote for features and also API features that they should add or should not add for whatever reason. So I think there's a really heavy focus on that. And there's another announcement, and I'm just going to show you the screen. It's probably easier. This looks like this. So it's kind of called associations in Search Console. You find it under the settings. And what it does is basically it allows you, similar to what you might be familiar with analytics, that you can kind of connect properties if you so will. So it's not groundbreaking, to be honest, but I think it was overdue to have like the same thing also with like pending requests and like where that came from and from what property and how it's linked, because I think we were always amazed to see how often it happens that when we kind of took over clients like who had still like access. So yeah, I think that's really good that happened now. So you have like a bit better overview of like what kind of is connected with what and who has access, etc., etc. So yeah, if you haven't seen that, go check it out. You will probably be surprised to see what is in there. The next one up is, and that's actually one that we need to talk a bit more about. I think this this image already says a lot of it, but as we have covered in like recent episodes, there's going to be this page experience update that's scheduled to happen in May, right? Yeah. And I think we also talked quite a bit, and I think we also had my like dedicated session on that in regards to like Google's Core Web Vitals, and that being somewhat like let's just say a part of that experience, if you so will, to kind of measure some of that. And a lot of SEOs were jumping on that train saying, look, this is super important. There's been so many discussions just recently on like, this needs to be done, that needs to be done. And it's all of a sudden, it became a super important topic. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm a huge fan, and I guess we all are somewhat, of like proper experiences, and that somewhat includes fast loading sites, because everything else is just like really frustrating. So if you have to wait for things, this is never great. But I think also, on the other hand, what happened, as always, right, like when Google pushes something with their like PR driven or like PR machinery, and then there's topics that are somewhat driven by that, then what happens relatively quickly is that gets an overemphasis on that, and then all of a sudden, like, everyone thinks it's like super important. But if you look at it in reality, and I think I mentioned it at least once or twice on the show already, like when you look at what happened with like the HTTPS situation, right? So all of a sudden, like, HTTPS or like SSL connections became this ranking factor. Then, I mean, I'm not saying it's not. I'm just, what I was saying is, and I stand by that, is it was never really significant in terms of like if you had done it or not. It just wouldn't make much of a difference. And certainly what you wouldn't be getting is this massive boost, right? So this is the biggest thing. And I guess the same is true for what we're seeing here, because so there was a tweet that Danny Sullivan put out, and it said, look, I said it shouldn't be the case that overnight we kind of flip this switch and there's a massive change, right? So that's not typically how rollouts of this nature, such as speed, and then he's also referring to mobile friendliness, which is another example, have worked. And also, things tend to be relative. And I think this is actually, it's the closing of the sentence, but it's actually a very, very important point, because what are they going to do? Like, if the entire top X is very, very slow, I mean, what are they going to do? Like, they demote like the top 10, and then there's just like quality-wise really bad result gonna rank. This is not going to happen anyways, right? So it is always in relation to, and this is similar to a lot of other things. It's always in relation to how does the kind of industry, I think is probably the kind of the best way to phrase it, but like industry environment, and probably down to the search result for that specific query, or let's say like the topical cluster. How does that look like, and how does the competition level look like for that in kind of in detail? And I think then, and there's like a follow-up that kind of describes it as well, like, with page experience, it could become more important factor over time, which I think again makes sense, right? It's the same with speed or like any other thing. Like, of course, if like it's just the other way around, like if everyone is improving, you can of course up the thresholds, right? Like, but if no one is improving, you're not going to up the thresholds. So what you're going to do is you up the threshold, and of course the entry barrier becomes higher. So yes, the factor itself is somewhat evolving. I think a clear sign for that was already there, like ever since they announced it, because like no one really paid attention to it. But like the core Web Vitals was always labeled as the 2020 set, right? And it was already quite clear that, well, yeah, it might be true that the 2020 is going to be the same for 2021. There hasn't been any changes just yet, but there's this clear indication, if you label that for like with a year, that there's going to be changes happening in the future. And I'm not saying only might the thresholds be changed. Maybe it's going to be a fourth or a fifth, or maybe it's just going to be two. Yeah, no one knows, right? So this is like this is what I'm saying. Like, it's going to be kind of a moving target. And I guess what surprised me was that a lot of people were like, all of a sudden it's super important, we do it, and then it's kind of done, which is like, I think one of my most famous closing slides, if you so will, is this one saying, like, in regards to web performance, it's saying like, this is like, web performance is never just a project, right? I mean, of course you can do like a project to kind of fix a bunch of things and get like to a certain level, but I mean, we all know that websites are somewhat evolving. There's going to be changes, there's going to be technical changes, there's going to be like, I don't know, changes in the templates and whatnot, and they all somewhat affect, similar to like that they can affect SEO, but they certainly will also kind of impact like web performance, right? So you have new JavaScript, which all of a sudden makes the site slow. You add banners, you do X, Y, Z, right? It all has an impact to performance, and therefore, it can't just be a project. It needs to be kind of continued effort. I'm not saying don't do a project to clean it up, but that's just not sufficient. So I found it quite interesting that it became this big of a headline, because I think it was already somewhat clear. But yeah, so that's a good documentation.
But not for everyone, right?
No, apparently not, right? So there's a good documentation on SEO Roundtable, kind of summarizing all of that in a bit more detail. again, frankly, going back to this entire discussion, I just imagine that there's not going to be much of an impact at all. But we shall see how that goes. So yeah, that's that. This is the tweet with it. We're gonna link it, and there's like another write-up on the kind of the same topic that Barry did over at in more depth, obviously over at Search Engine Land, kind of like doing kind of the same thing, right? Like stuff that I mentioned, like mobile get on, HTTPS update is in here as well. Similar true for like the interstitial like penalty that never really had a massive impact. Only like over time when they kind of baked some of that stuff into the core algorithm updates. So, well, I think this is also our recommendation when we do like audits right now. And there's a lot of audits. There's a lot of demand for audits. There's a lot of demand for like web performance optimization, at least more in comparison to, and maybe like year over year is not fair because we had like the breakout of the pandemic, but nevertheless, like there's a significantly higher demand in terms of like web performance, which I can see. But again, don't freak out. Get the basics sorted. There's not going to be like, you're not going to lose all your rankings overnight just because come May they roll out this update. I think this is just a fear that's just not necessary.
All right. So there will be not the snap moment where everything is going to be changed. So it's more important to have
I doubt it.
Get everything to a proper level, and afterwards it should be like a continuous process, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And then continue it afterwards, and then I think you'd be completely fine. Yeah.
But this is what we see for so many topics, right? As you already mentioned. I mean, it's the same for when we talk about like authority and trust and content and digital PR and whatever. I mean, it's always important to have your cleanup and do your homework to a proper or a certain level, and afterwards you need to continue your measures, right?
Absolutely. That's something that's very true for like a lot of the things, and I guess in search or like in SEO specifically. One thing that kind of ties in quite nicely, and this is why I just opened up, like this doesn't really help much, but like there was a change and that's going back to like Search Console again. There was a change with the web performance metrics that tie into Core Web Vitals. So what they did is they changed the thresholds, but just to a tiny detail. Like they didn't change the numbers, but before it said just like XYZ less than, and now it's less or equal. So that's the change, but of course that will have an impact for some people in Search Console. So if you're like wondering why all of a sudden your Core Web Vitals report looks entirely or slightly different in terms of like how they kind of come together in terms of the kind of the percentage, maybe if you had been at this threshold, that might have been already it. So they just changed that. It's not a bug in that way. So there's a bit of a write-up in here where like we had this where there's a kind of this performance comparison. So like good before was just like the LCP below 2.5 seconds, and now it's just like below or equal. So at the end of the day, that means of course that you might now see a bit more green than before, because if you were like exactly on the threshold of 2.5, then it's now it would now be included in the green, versus before it wasn't. So that's the tiny difference here, and then you can see like this back and forth. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Don't be surprised when there's any kind of changes going that you don't understand because for whatever reason you didn't even touch the site, right? Then this is a bit further kind of back in February, first half, so to say, on the 11th in a bit more detail. And this is a really interesting one, I have to say, because there was, and I think I mentioned that also in we talked about it in the recap for January, because there was this big piece on SEO.org where I also had the possibility to contribute some of my thoughts on like, what are we going to see this year, joined by some fantastic SEOs like Cindy Crum was there and some others where like and funny enough, she also talked about like passage ranking and kind of the impact, and that we think that people are kind of underestimating it. And before it was Google said, look, we got to roll it out entirely. And it's a bit funny because Julia mentioned the same thing last week, that some of the announcements that Google made just like kind of started in English or English, and then some of the major European languages and whatnot. And it's exactly the same thing. I think we even talked about it last week. Now they kind of somewhat reverted and said, well, look, we're gonna only do it in US English for now. So I think it goes back to this entire situation of them just having by far the best understanding of English language, as well as, of course, having by far the biggest data set. You can certainly have much better predictions, much better essentially text analysis and probably ML going on that. So not really a surprise. Interesting that in that way, interesting though that the announcement was phrased entirely different. And the curious mind wonders, why did they have to revert back? Does it not work in other languages? Is there something else going on? We probably won't find out, but just keep in mind that if there's this discussion, and this is probably especially tailored to our kind of viewers from like the European region, because there's a bit of chatter in the US about this. It's not there for us. So if you see something that correlates, keep in mind that this can't be it, really. So yeah, that has been rolled out 10th of February. Also quite interesting because like no one knew. They didn't like kind of announce the date. It should have been there much earlier. That never happened, and then all of a sudden it was there. So that was quite interesting. If you're not familiar with it, there's like in this article, which we're gonna link, there's also like an in-depth like a write-up of how this works and what passage indexing and passage ranking and why there's this confusion. What is the one and what is the other, and like some of the namings around it, and etc. etc. I think we also covered a piece a bit earlier the year where it's more about like that it doesn't impact rich and featured snippets. I think we're going to talk about snippets in a bit as well. But so yeah, just like if you're not familiar with the concept, or if you're wondering what it is, then this is certainly something that you need to probably investigate as well. Then coming back to events very, very quickly, because this is here for you to kind of re-watch. There was actually a Google event called Search Central Live, which had kind of 3 different sessions. This time was kind of tailored to, I think, a time zone somewhat over in Asia, specifically Japan. So it was like very late hour time. But anyways, there were like three kind of chats, and as you can see on the screen already, obviously some of the Googlers were there. Martin Split, kind of, I think he had 3 sessions, actually all of the 3. Then there was Danny Sullivan for one, and Ashley from DeepCrawl. Cherry, I think, is also working over at Google. So yeah, there was a bunch of kind of talks and chats. I think there was also one episode of the podcast somewhat done live. So that was also quite interesting. But yeah, so feel free to kind of poke around. It was more kind of a dialogue, Q&A situation, and a bit of a fireside chat. So didn't really reveal that much, except for one topic, which is not part of this like panel of 4, but it was one of the sessions where Gary was also dialed in, and what he said, and all of a sudden there was this huge like aha moment, which was quite funny, is that he said, look, like page titles, even if they are longer than what we display, they still carry value. And I think also our friends over at Write, like with their 302 of a Kind show on last Friday, I just briefly dialed in for a couple of minutes, touched on that topic. And I think Marcus was saying something similar. I was like, well, if you had been optimizing this for like just, being all visible straight away, you probably haven't understood in the first place how that works really. I mean, of course, if they're not cut off, they might have a higher CTR because you can read the full message. But, let's be very honest, if this is like this full informational piece, then you just write in a way that the title actually makes sense. And then there's certain scenarios and situations where you can't even do that just with the visible portion of the title, and that's fine. But yeah, of course, all the SEO tools are giving you like the red warning situation. So again, don't freak out. It's just a tool. It's just giving you a recommendation, but it's not like this is the only truth, right? So
it will not
proper
break
titles,
anything.
No, proper titles, don't spam them, make them readable. I think this is also what you guys are saying all the time when you do content audits. So that was in there. Again, bit surprising to me as to why it got that much attention, but probably worth mentioning here as well. Yeah, coming back to Search Console one more time, there's a good friend Glenn Gabe posted a very thorough, as he always does, and I'm just gonna scroll quickly, but yeah, as you can see, it's a very in-depth post again on, like, and it doesn't stop on, yeah, there we go, on Soft 404s. I just want to kind of give you the summary. I mean, Soft 404s in Search Console obviously is, well, it can be frustrating, but it can also be quite helpful to understand and see when Google kind of gives you, well, let's say an indication of pages not being as worthy as they should be, right? So, thin on content, potentially low quality, maybe something that should be actually a real 404, but you're serving like a 200 status code, all of those situations. And this has been changed a lot. And I think we announced it, I think, in our last recap, because it has been rolled out significantly earlier. And like now, Glenn did like a deep dive with a lot of examples. So if you're not sure why it dropped for you and you kind of have your doubts as to why and how to analyze that, this is like the post that you probably might want to check out, because there's like really a one-on-one walkthrough as to like how to understand what are soft 404s, how does it work, what can be this source for it, etc., etc. So really helpful, very in-depth. If that's an issue that you are somewhat tackling, then certainly have a look, because, well, it's a really great write-up as always. This is, I need to make it a bit bigger, probably. Yep, there we go. Yep. So Tobias Willmann did a nice post, and this is very techy, but nevertheless, on how to kind of use GSC and specifically the API, as well as kind of Google Cloud Functions. They usually are JavaScripts, and then how to push that data into Google Sheets. I mean, we are also huge fans of automating things, and like Steffen's entire team, so our Martech team, does a lot of work on that. Just building data lakes, storing data mainly in BigQuery, sometimes in other kind of in other environments, and then making them accessible, or run certain types of analyzers on top of that. So this is like a really cool post, relatively fresh, because I know that a lot of people are somewhat still like struggling, and sadly also like the Google API sometimes is really a bit weird and not that friendly, because it's a bit, let's say, a bit older in as to how it has been set up, specifically with like the authentication methods and whatnot. A lot of people are like really complaining sometimes because it's frustrating. So I thought it's worth mentioning it here, because it's like a very recent post. So this one definitely works, and it's very simple actually, and straightforward as to, like, for example, if you need some data in Sheets for like to play around with or share with afterwards, it's a really nice way to do that. He even shared like the GitHub code as to how to do that. So then how to build the sheet, create the project. You need to do that obviously, and then like its service account and permissions, and then you need to run it essentially, and then it just transfers the data. So access the GSC obviously transfers the data into the sheet that you need. And then with a scheduler, this is probably the beauty of it, because you don't want to do it manually. You don't want to have to kind of set it up once or twice or whatever. It just kind of, you can say when it's supposed to run, and then it runs. So including like a nice video where I put it together. So it's a really cool kind of helping tutorial if you're dealing with any kind of automation and you maybe don't have a team that's too familiar with it. I think it's a good low barrier entry into the topic. Speaking of low barrier entry, there is so our friend Aleda was quite busy in the last 1.5 weeks or so, and put together, so it's learningseo.io, kind of it says it's a roadmap of free resources. I think it's a bit more, but so it kind of gives you, if you are starting out in SEO and you want to kind of, you maybe a bit lost on topics, or how to structure that, or what are the must-read resources, etc., etc. So this is like a massive collection of all the things, if you so will. So essentially, it's a spreadsheet that you can use. So it's clustered here. Obviously, you can just kind of go through certain things. It's just a bit broken, I think, because of my Zoom here. Yeah.
Oh.
The spreadsheet is broken. Anyhow, there's this is probably better. So there's a Google spreadsheet link below where like the links are in. So I think that's probably the best way to kind of use it. You can make a copy of it. You can work your way through it. There's like, various sections, just generally introduction, and then, the way it works is like you have a resource with a link, and it just collects, official stuff from Google, but also from like the big the big publishers, or like the content sites and the tool providers and whatnot, with like beginners guides, keyword research, content, tech, and link building, and then more specific stuff, JavaScript, as well as web performance, mobile, structured data, images, video, migration, and so on and so forth. Yeah, it's literally really everything. Audits and etc. So really, really cool. Very in depth. I think. If it's not in here, it's probably you probably don't need it. So, and then automation, etc. And then like news sources, newsletters. And then she added, which I kind of reviewed yesterday or the day before I put it into kind of the show notes, like also a huge section on like all the free tools, doing monitoring, web performance, etc. So if you're looking for anything, there's a high chance that it's probably in here. So recommend you make a copy for yourself so that you have it all like somewhat linked and put aside, not only if you're getting into it, but just also if you need a reference for something, because I think there's nothing out there in comparison to this one. So really, really cool. True. Lots of effort went into that one. And then moving on to a bit more like the kind of content-ish link building digital PR side of things. There was a pretty big piece on Root Digital, actually. I think that got released also mid of January or something, February, if I'm not wrong. Mm-hmm. And what it is essentially it's a really cool overview of now 300 campaigns, actually. 300 campaigns that you can kind of choose, like the formats, as well as like industries and like kind of markets, and then it gives you like an overview, and if you just like, it gives you like a link count, and then you can just open it up here, and then you get to the landing page. So this is actually how it works. So there's like not a write-up with the mechanics behind it. It just kind of, this is what it is. But like if you're looking for some inspiration, but also maybe want to see how topics worked or didn't work, I don't know. But so the minimum, I think you said like minimum requirements something like 20 links, 20 links or something. So this is really cool. If you need some like inspiration and some stuff for like building out campaigns, trying to see maybe what worked in another market, etc. This is
I love the market
this
compare.
Is your list.
So this was basically the best thing I've seen in February. I was so happy when not the market compare itself, but the whole landing page with the filter function by campaign, because I just straightly shared with my team, because it gives so much inspiration to see which kind of format worked best on which kind of market, right? With also which kind of visuals. I mean, of course, this case is beautiful. We have shared that many times, I guess.
I was going to say, we talked about that before,
for the UK market. This is pretty
I think
helpful.
that's the point, right? I think it's pretty UK centric, like the entire list. Well, UK/English, but nevertheless, I mean, this is a really nice thing. To kind of, and then also it gives you, again, like if it's just kind of infographics, or you can pre-filter that, or is it like some data-driven stuff, etc. So really, really cool resource. Very much appreciate it. I appreciate the effort that Darren put into kind of curating this one. And then there was a topic that I think you put it on our list as well, like making cold emails hot again. And funny enough, I saw the headline, but I didn't have the time to. It's still on my reading list, so apparently you were a bit faster than I was. So what is that all about?
Yeah, that is something I just wanted to point out. It's from Bibi Raven. She just wrote here her recap about the session she had for the Digital PR Summit back in the beginning of February. The videos are not published yet from the other sessions. That's why I thought, and I didn't saw her session, so I found it super interesting to see at least the recap. And it's about segmentation of outreach and also finding the right approach. And I think the angle there was, I mean, especially when you try to scale your outreach activities for several markets, you want to be as efficient as possible. But if you scale outreach or you try to scale outreach, the quality will not stay the same, right? So this is why she wanted to point out that it's super important to work with a segmentation method within your outreach period. So always try to do proper research about your target audience. Of course, build relationships is always important. I mean, doesn't matter if it's like a scalable campaign or not, but you always need to have like your relationships in place. And then she at the next year there's an segmentation, an example where you need to think about prospecting. So when you work on a campaign, and I think that example here is about like truck sellers, or a campaign about like any for Mack trucks. Yeah, that was the example here. And she just pointed out that it's always important to think about, of course, persona. So think about your target audience and which kind of target media you want to reach out, and then just try to segment via there are like 3 different the narrow prospecting point, where how to prospect and how to segment those prospects by she said here that it's by I cannot read it, but sites that rank on the keywords she want to target. That's better. Thank you.
Yes, 200% zoom.
So perfect. Yeah. So to do, of course, like whenever you work or you try to find your prospects, of course you do like a bit of like Google research with your Google search apparatus and so on, but also use your tools and your existing network. And whenever you try to prospect, you should divide into like sites who rank already on the keywords, because there you have, of course, a different kind of approach in your outreach, email or phone call, whatever. Then a site that is relevant to the customer's journey, which has maybe a bit or way broader field of interest. And then she also pointed out the third one, sites around topics that my audience is interested in. So this is super important to have in mind, I guess, here. And I found it quite interesting. So to point out just the topic of segmenting at all, because this is something I do not see in many cases. I mean, I think everybody knows that whenever you try to approach somebody and try to share your content to get some publications, you should personalize your approach. But especially when you try to scale something, then this is way more important to prospect to segment your prospects, not only by which one is the most important target page or target media, but also how can I still scale a bit while segmenting my prospect list by different kind of interest fields or different kind of personas, of course, different kind of publishers and everything around that. And after the segmentation, you can be way faster, of course, because you have something like it's still something like a template, but you still need to personalize your template.
Yeah, but you have you have the grouping already done, and then that makes sense.
Exactly. So
nice.
I'm still waiting, of course, for the videos. Digital Love will share that within the next few days, I guess. And then there will be the session again. Exactly. What else?
And then we had this one, Google showing fewer featured snippets since February 19th. And I think this is a graph taken from probably Rank Ranger, Mozzcast, Rank Ranger, and then SEMrush, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So this is just something I just wanted to show. I think I did some research. Nobody had like a proper reason for that. Nobody has the explanation for that one. I'm still trying to monitor what happens after that. I mean, that was like mid of February. I have no idea what happened there, but if you are or were surprised during mid of February, what happened there? We don't know. Nobody knows, I guess. But I already saw that. I just checked for some of our clients that they are going to increase since the last week, but still not at the same level as we have seen before mid of February. Still, I have no idea what happened there. I just wanted to point out that you are not the only one if you wonder what happened there.
If you wonder what's happening there. Okay, fair enough.
Exactly.
All right.
So
and then,
don't know the reason why. Yeah.
We shall see. We
shall see.
If there's any changes coming.
I keep an eye on that, of course, but still found out no reason.
Okay, and then I think we have one more where we talk about PDFs, right?
Yeah, this was just something I found during the last days. The tweet where it was about have you ever seen the PDFs or feature snippet based
I saw
on
the
PDFs?
thread. Yeah.
And then I just followed the thread and saw the examples where here, for instance, Glenn Gabe posted I've seen several ones like featured snippets from PDFs, and it was for me okay, to be honest, I've never seen that before. But because many people, and also some of our clients, of course, and many people are having discussions with whenever we talk about PDFs for instance, for a content marketing campaign, because it will be something like a white paper, for instance, because we did a study. So many people have in mind that it's like that content. So you produce something, put it into a PDF, and then it's just there, but you have no chance to do something more with the content than having it linked to your landing page or to collect any kind of data from your customers or something around that. And I've just found it super surprising, but also interesting in order to rethink anything in terms of PDF publications, of course, because it's still a super valuable content format, of course, whenever we think about data-driven content pieces, but also lead gen relevant content. I mean, next week we were going to talk about B2B content, right? Or content marketing for B2B. So I thought that pretty much ties in into the topic of next week, but also we're just a small eye opener, I would say.
But you're right. I mean, I think it kind of goes back to a bit of a larger issue here, which is a conceptual problem, right? As you said, for most people, it's somewhat this kind of dead end, really. And I think, frankly, they are not. I'm curious what's going to happen with the full mobile first switch, because I think the biggest issue that I see right now with PDFs is that they are really hard to use on mobile phones, right? That's the big problem. It starts with the fact that oftentimes they are poorly optimized, and therefore they are some megabytes heavy. And then if you're on anything that's slower than a 4G, actually, it takes forever to even download that. And then if it works, once you have it on the phone, then it's downloaded. For some phones, it's just somewhat somewhere hidden. It doesn't open automatically, or they can't show the PDF, or the PDF for whatever reason is not working. So I think there's a whole variety of issues if you're not on the desktop. I think that's the one thing. And secondarily, I think PDFs suffer more from the fact that they're just very poorly optimized. I mean, if you look at PDFs in general, most people just forget the basics from a search perspective, right? They don't have a proper title. The file names are wrong. They don't have even readable links pointing to the homepage. Sometimes they're just a full image in the PDF. So there's a whole bunch of things that just go wrong. That just go wrong when you already create the PDF. But you're right. If you do it correct conceptually, and you have the link and you have them optimized down to a certain kind of a certain size, and quality wise, you kind of make it work. I think then it's a very valuable asset to have. And I think there's also no reason why a PDF shouldn't be ranking here if it fulfills all the criteria. I think it's more like this hen-egg problem, because if you turn it around, there's probably a lot of PDFs are not ranking here because they're just not properly optimized, and therefore you just see that that often that they are just not popping up here. I think this is kind of the thing. So, I think it goes back to like when you use the format, you just need to make sure that you also just kind of do the basics right, have the proper structure, kind of optimize them down to a minimum, but still kind of maintain quality, etc. So I think that's more important than anything else, really.
Yeah. So true. Yeah, and it's just like very small things you should have in mind, right? I mean, it's not not rocket science to have in mind there in order to optimize your PDFs.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's actually kind of just it's just more like a checklist style approach that you really need to follow there, right? So it's like it's yeah. So I think that's more the reason than anything, really. However, it's a good remark, because I think also, like, I recall a situation where we did like an audit where the client had like a lot of, it was a publisher actually, and like a lot of content was sitting on a subdomain because the PDFs were hosted on that subdomain. The subdomain was not linked back. The PDFs didn't link back. So like this entire thing had like literally it had more trust because the PDFs got cited by research publications and linked from Wikipedia and whatnot. They didn't link to the article, they linked to the PDF, right? So that subdomain actually had more trust than the main domain in certain cases. So yeah, I think that's something that you will certainly, as part of a content audit, probably need to discover, and then just need to understand what you can do, right? I mean, at least you could like potentially go and do like, you know, header-based canonical tags, or you know, in that case, moving the kind of the hosting to the main domain so that kind of the links pop over directly to the dub in whatever it is. But like just letting them sit and don't do anything is probably not the right approach. What I also sadly see, to kind of finish this topic off, is that a lot of people then say, well, look, I don't want the PDF to rank in the search results, and all of a sudden they kind of go and robots text them out. I think that's just the worst thing to do. I mean, yes, they don't pop up then anymore, but like you will lose like all the link equity and whatnot. So just like, you know, if you deal with PDFs, then, you know, either you let them rank and you make them accessible, and that there's a link you can pop over to the page itself, or, you know, you have the same version as an HTML variant, and then you could at least kind of have a canonical pointing back, or you know, something like that. But I would just not like, just because, but I mean, it's a good thing that they rank. Just don't block them then straight away. Just be a bit smarter about it, because that's just probably doing more harm than good anyways. So yeah, that's probably my quick 5 cents on PDFs. So probably quite an underutilized format, actually.
Sorry?
It's quite an underutilized format, actually, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think people have maybe not 100% the right mindset about PDFs, right?
Yeah, so, very true. Very true. And I think this kind of already marks what, I mean, yeah, we made it in good time, 47 minutes, fantastic. This kind of marks already what we had for you guys today. So, so much for our like February recap. Next week, we're going to be back. We have our very own Sarah joining us, if I'm not wrong.
Yep.
And we're going to talk a bit about content marketing for B2Bs. I'm already quite excited. I think it's going to be worth your while. So make sure that you dial back in 4 p.m. German time next Tuesday. And I guess with that, we are switching off. Right?
Great.
Let's do that. Anyhow.
Thanks.
All right. Cheers.
Thanks for dialing in. See you next week. Bye.